Greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to episode 152, our last one of the year.
And we made it.
And we made it to
I will
the
say,
end of
if
the year.
anyone was listening to that at 2x speed,
That was fast.
you didn't hear anything Jason just said.
Jason was already talking really fast.
I thought
why I
I
do it
was
that way.
listening to the podcast on 2x.
I'm trying to mess with the folks who are double speeding me.
That's
okay.
right.
No,
I'm
I
double
honestly
speeding
had not
everything.
even had that thought. Thanks for that thought.
I listen
Dave.
to everything at double speed, but that would be fast.
Yes,
That
it
was
would.
fast. That
So,
was-
if you just joined our podcast for the very first
You know
time,
who I
you
can't
don't know
listen-
who we are.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going to introduce who
Oh,
we
yeah,
are.
go ahead.
Then
I'm
you
sorry
can
for
make your
interrupting
point.
you. You know I do all that.
I
all
actually
the time.
forgot to
I
do
apologize.
this. I forgot to do this on the last podcast, and I felt bad.
So right now, for those of you who are back on the last one, can we do it that way? No. Oh, okay.
Did you notice the whole time Ed was apologizing for interrupting, he just continued to interrupt Jason
Yes.
the entire time?
Yes, I noticed.
I apologize again.
I'm Jason. This is Ed, the interrupter, and this is Nathan. We are the teaching team here at Community Christian Church, and we do this podcast to answer your questions, help you think like Jesus in our world, and we're doing that again. But like I said, we're here at the end of the year. You guys got anything to say to the folks as the year comes to a close?
Happy 2023.
I hope it will be.
Yeah.
I thought 2022 was a good one.
I did too, and I heard somebody the other day just talk about how horrible 22 was. I hope next year's good, and I'm like, I thought we were done with that in 2020.
You know, I have come to believe that there is a group of people that about September every year is like, oh, this year can't end fast enough. And that's what they said the year before. And the year
before that.
And the year before that. And
As if every January somehow is going to magically fix everything.
It's just,
No?
yeah.
Maybe we'll find out. Maybe you'll be
Maybe
wrong.
I'm
Maybe this
just-
Maybe I'll be
January
wrong.
will fix
Maybe we're
everything.
just optimistic dudes.
I think so. I think I'm optimistic.
I feel like I'm becoming more optimistic. I think
I've been told I'm naive. I don't know if that counts as optimistic.
in some,
Can you be cynical and optimistic?
I don't think so.
I'll think about that for a minute. Depends on what you mean by that. But for me, and I don't mean this to be, exclusive or to, be judgmental, but
But it's going to come off
it's
that
going
way.
to come off that way. I feel like the longer you walk with Jesus, the more optimistic and positive you ought to become.
Sure.
I feel like you might be doing it wrong.
Yeah, I think hopeful is certainly.
Hopeful.
I should certainly be looking forward. In fact, this Thursday on the podcast, the Family Movie Night podcast, that's exactly what we're talking about. It's how to based on our conversation, I guess 3 episodes ago about the end times or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We decided to end our year looking at kind of like apocalyptic movies,
cool.
end of the world type movies,
Yeah.
and talk about how there are so many teenagers. I read a report about Gen Z and millennials there's a larger portion than in previous generations that are refusing to have children because of things like climate change and like school shootings and mass shootings, that they believe it's irresponsible because the world is getting worse from their perspective. And we're going to talk about how, as Christians, we have to live with a foot in both things and be able to look at, yes, that there are problems in our world, that Jesus was fully aware of the injustice and the problems in the world, and that even though certain things in our world have gotten drastically better, there are still things in our world that are just horrible.
Yeah.
But we can always look to the future with hope, knowing that the end times or that Christ is working in people. All of what's coming forward is going to be good and beautiful and right. So anyway, we're talking about that on Thursday and how to help our teenagers not live with as much anxiety.
I just sitting thinking, you're saying, don't have children because you think the end of the world's coming. But if you're wrong about the end of the world, by not having children, you have brought about the end of the world. Because you and all your generation decided to not have children.
Thanks for that logical conclusion.
Age will kill us all.
Some way,
Whether
somehow.
climate change does not, age
is.
is 100%.
So I think where we came to on that is when you said, and maybe this is the answer to the cynical and optimist, if what you mean is fully aware of that that we are not called to live in a way that we are unaware of the problem. But there is a way to live in the world where people say if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. There is a way to pay attention and not be angry.
I agree.
There is a way
Yes.
to pay attention.
Or at least not let anger take over you.
Sure, and not be outraged and not be
Yes.
not be
That's a good distinction.
Yeah.
Angry but not outraged.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that our motivation As Dallas always said, anything that can be done with anger can be done better without it. Our Christ's motivation for doing things was compassion, which may initially feel like anger. It may feel in my stomach, but my motivation is not anger and contempt. My motivation is love and compassion, which I know is not the question that we are dealing with
Not
today.
at all.
But it drove me to
But
once again plug the family.
That is our year-end message for the people
Be hopeful.
who listen to this podcast.
All things will be made well. So
All will be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be made well.
There you go.
said
that's
that?
original to Jason Collins.
No, it wasn't.
No, it's not.
It's like who said
I think it's
that?
Catherine of Siena.
Catherine of Siena. That's who said it. Anyway, all right. Here is our question for, and like I teased last week, we're going to get into maybe a little political stuff because I think that's what the person wants to know. They want to hear our opinion.
Somebody wants to stir it.
I'm stirring that pot, man. So we'll see if the pot gets stirred. Here's the question. Are you guys conservative or progressive? Spiritually, politically, or socially? And the final question is, does it matter?
Does this question
Apparently does to
Are
this
you saying we
person.
can throw the question out and not answer it?
What if we
or-
said it doesn't matter? We
This
might just
doesn't
throw it
matter.
away.
I'm not going to answer this
Now,
question.
we are going to deal with this question.
So since it's not very wordy, we're going to get to interpret these
We are.
one-word questions the way we want to.
The categories of, especially
Yes.
conservative and progressive.
I think they want to know, do we consider ourselves conservative or progressive in all of these different areas of our world, political, social, spiritually?
And do those categories
And does
matter?
it really
Or
matter?
does it matter where you stand on it? I guess they mean, does it matter in terms of what Jesus would think?
Yeah,
Since
just-
we are a
Yeah.
podcast
Well, can we
trying
just-
to help people
Yeah.
figure out how to do life.
I just think it's important to be clear that these terms, conservative, progressive, and however you define those, are subjective terms because people just define them differently. And secondly, they didn't exist when Jesus was around. So if
No.
you're asking, does it matter in that sense? I don't think it does. But the thing, if you want to get down and try to define what it means, then we can figure out, okay, where am I on each of these specific issues, maybe, if that's what you're interested in. But no, I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because it is just a way of talking about something. It's a sort of a subjective definition, right? And to me, I don't.
I guess
think
it
matters.
depends on where it causes you to land. So
Yeah.
So let's take it in terms of things like, even spiritually, I'd have to say, am I conservative or progressive in views of the Scripture?
And I'm assuming that's what they mean by spiritual is
guess.
biblically about my interpretation.
Well, I think
of
there could
Scripture.
be all kinds of things on that. I don't want to get. So I think biblical. I believe the Bible is inspired, and with the qualification that most people add in its autographs.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we don't have any of the autographs, so that if we had them, those words were inspired. That meaning that some of the textual things that we find out over time as we get more and more of the copies of ancient manuscripts, we find, oh, that passage of Scripture, there's been a couple of textual things that need to be noted about it.
Sure.
So I'm not saying that. I believe every word of the Scripture is inspired of God.
Yes.
So
I agree
I
with
think
that
that's a
statement.
very conservative position on that.
But again, it depends on who you're talking to.
True.
So the way I look at it is, when people say conservative, what you really mean, what the word means is, I'm trying to conserve something.
I'm holding
I'm
on
holding
to
on
something.
to something that should be important.
Right.
So we can have a conversation about what are things that are unchanging
Right.
that we should hold on to. And then when you say I'm progressive, well, then that just means that I think things ought to get better. They ought to progress.
They ought to move on from these things that we've had in the
so
past.
in that sense, I think everybody would call themselves a progressive based on that definition. But the argument comes in, what is the definition of things progressing and getting better?
And what
Yeah,
thing,
what things
what
should
thing,
progress
and what
and what
should
things
progress.
That's
So what
right.
do we hold on to? What do we kind of, allow to grow and change for the better of people?
Right.
I think we all want that. So that's a conversation, but I don't think I can have that conversation based on just this one question because I don't know exactly what you mean by that terminology.
Sure.
So I don't mean to shut it down, but that's what I think of when I read your question.
I think I am probably more. Once again, I agree with everything you said about the labels. It's very difficult for me to to be able just to say I'm a conservative.
So why
or
don't
I'm
we
a
try to
progressive.
then not get caught in their labels, but to describe where we are on certain things? And I'm okay with you putting me, whoever the questioner is, on your scale wherever you are, because I'm okay
Yeah.
with where I am.
Well, and that's the thing is,
you know,
what people call me is really not of concern to me.
right?
I think for me, it just comes down to, you know, what is the most Christ-like position to take on anything. And so I would say to you, there have been people who I've had conversations with that listen to me talk. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. I was talking to a family member one time just about a political situation that was going on in the country. And they stopped for a second. They said, "Oh, wait, are you a Democrat?" And I stopped and I said, "No." And they said, "Well, how can you take that position?" And I said, "Well, you just need to know, I don't label myself Republican or Democrat. I said I'm a Christian." I said, "So because of, I believe this is the position Jesus would have me take on this specific issue.
Right.
And if you think that then pulls me over into the progressive side, well, so be it."
Right.
But I said, but you and I could probably have some discussions about other issues, and you would think, "Oh, wow, you're really conservative."
Right.
And I said, so I don't think that if you're really trying to stay faithful to Jesus, I don't think you can camp out on one or either side, because I think those labels they were not created in light of Scripture. They were not created in light of the Jesus life.
And I think there was a time, Jason, particularly in yours and my time in being in ministry, if somebody had asked me if I was conservative, there was a tie in our country between people who were conservative about the Bible and conservative in historic Christianity, let's say.
Yes.
In basic. I know there's some variation within that.
Yep.
And people who were considered conservative politically in the United States, that those matched up. But politically in our country, the conservative thing has gotten a little off the rails
Yeah.
and has moved. And I'll say this, the progressive
there's
side of the
progressive side.
has as well.
Yes.
But there used to be that if you were conservative Christian, you matched up on certain things. So when people would say to me, you know, where are you on right to life? Well, I believe in the sanctity of human life, but I believe it beyond just the unborn, which then when you get into the conservative thing, it seems like only the unborn matter.
There's a big emphasis on it.
There's a huge emphasis, and I'm not saying that's 100% for everybody,
Yeah.
but there's not as much emphasis on life of people after they're born.
Yeah.
And on the progressive side, they sort of ignore the life before birth.
That's right.
There's a lot of emphasis. So people say, well, you have to choose. Well, I choose on those particular issues, just tell you where I am on both of those issues.
That's right.
Because I don't fit well politically into those kind of things.
That's right. I've often said to people, I tend to be too conservative for the progressives and too liberal for the conservatives. And I get caught in the middle of all of this stuff. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I feel comfortable in that because I feel like I'm in the process, not perfect, but I'm trying to remain faithful to Jesus. And that often causes a tension on both sides. And honestly, if I ever get to a point, me personally, I'm just speaking for me, if I ever get to a point where I am in lockstep with either side on pretty much everything, I fear that I may have, as we have said around here, placed my politics ahead of my faith. I need to see my politics through the lens of Jesus rather than vice versa. And so for me, I enjoy that tension because I think it reminds me that I am hopefully doing that in the proper order.
I think for me, I've been trying to think through, because this is all, I don't know. I'm trying to honor your question because I'm assuming that you're not trying to put us into labels, and maybe you're trying to understand us better. I think when I've answered this question for both my believing friends and even my non-believing friends, I have a couple who are very politically and socially active. my answer has been that my primary allegiance is to Jesus and his church. So spiritually, I don't even think, and this may be bad, I don't think a lot about conservative or progressive on issues. Our church has a statement of faith. I grew up in this church. It is impossible for me to divorce my faith from what I was taught in this church. And so anything, and our church, and I think we preached on this sometime this year of, in essentials, we hold the unity and everything, and then they're all, everything else is, grace or something like that.
And all things love.
And all things love.
Essentials, unity, non-essentials, liberty. In all things we demonstrate love.
And so for me, when it comes spiritually, I try to align with my community. And I'm talking about Community Christian. And there are things, and we were talking at a staff meeting one about a specific issue that I said when I was younger, it was very difficult for me to align with the church on this particular thing. But I knew I am a part of this community, and I am fully committed to Jesus and his church. And there have been things that I know both of these guys know people in our church because I'm in the community that I have tried to push us on and try to say, hey, I think we should be more on this and doing this thing. But all of those things still align within my commitment to us as a church. And I believe faith is a communal thing, not my individual opinions don't matter all that much. And I don't mean that to say that you don't ever disagree or you don't do that. But all of that, to our last episode, is in submission to this greater community. That until I see someone come out and say something that I can see just blatantly goes against what God says, but even in that, I would go to the person and go, hey, isn't this what God, there would be a discussion within that. I believe the elders of our church are prayerfully considering these things. And so then when it comes, and I believe, and I think we all would agree on this, I believe our church agrees with this, that politics are non-essentials to the faith. Yes. So where I stand, I hold all of that incredibly loosely. And I mean that. I mean incredibly loosely. I did not always. I hold it incredibly loosely because, and maybe one of my friends told me it's a cop-out. I don't know on most issues. And people on staff would tell you, that's not the way my brain works. I am not how should people organize themselves? How should things work this way? But I, once again, trust, and there have been issues that I've voted on. There have been issues I haven't voted on. All of that, though, has been through conversations with brothers and sisters in the community, things I've been moved to socially, because, once again, brothers and sisters in my community say, this affects my life. And I would go, okay, I will, because I want to support you, I can get in on this. And this is not, and this may sound like a cop-out. I'm not trying to cop out from your question. I just feel like I personally, my answer is I belong to Community Christian Church. And I think the conservative and progressive part, I just don't know. I don't know how. Like Jason said, people in my generation think I'm insanely conservative on most of my views about social issues, maybe not political issues, but social issues, certainly anything spiritual, because almost no one in my, even the believers who are in my generation do not hold to many orthodox, historic Christian views, and I do, because we at Community Christian do on many, many issues. And I would say older people think I'm pretty progressive. I've had older people say that, but I think that's kind of normal. So I
it is.
You just reminded me, we mentioned this, I think, a little bit in the last podcast. I've been going to school recently at a secular university. And
I also went to that university.
Yeah. And so
what you mean is a real university.
Whatever that
We've
means.
both done both. And
I've been to both now.
Yeah.
But this time I'm in what you would call a secular university, sitting in secular classes. And
liberal arts college.
I find myself, it's very interesting. I go and sit in that place and find myself at odds with some of the things that are talked about just in passing, mostly just some opinions that I'm around with people, and they have no idea where I stand. I don't make a deal of it.
Right.
But then at the same time, I go to other places, like one in particular, I'm thinking of a family gathering that I went to recently that, boy, was the complete opposite of the discussion that I had just that same week in that classroom setting. And so, I did not feel the need to speak up for the sake of making peace and keeping peace in that situation. But I know, because I've talked to people in both of those settings, both of the people in those settings know that I love them dearly. Even some of the folks that I've gotten to know in my cohort in my school, we've gotten into each other's lives, and I've been able to serve them and know them and to love them in ways that I believe Jesus would lead me to. And of course, in my family, those people know I love them too. That was the thing I was mentioning earlier. There's a tension in that.
Sure.
But at the same time, I'm at home in both places because of that common thread of, I'm trying to be Jesus to these people.
Right.
And I'm trying to serve him and bring his kingdom into both of those circumstances. And so, like you said, Nathan, in one of those places, I'm extremely conservative. I would be shockingly conservative if I opened my mouth and did it in a way that would really come against some of the things they're talking about. But in the other, they would be shocked at how progressive I am in light of their opinions as well. I think that's the picture of Christ in the world that we live in. I could be wrong on that, and I know people would take issue with some of that stuff that I just said. That's okay. We can have those conversations.
Yeah, because I think again in non-essential issues, I have believing brothers and sisters who are very passionate about certain political issues, and I choose to trust you came to that because I know you came to that from your faith in Jesus led you to make this decision. And then I have others who have made the opposite decision, and I believe that they came to it. Now, that's not true for every believer. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that for the people in my community that I know, when I hear them talk about it, I go, okay, I can see how you came to that decision. And I think in those issues, like we said, if it's non-essential, we end up having liberty on those things. And we say, well, I still see you as a brother or sister. We can still be family. This does not cause any kind of difference between us over these kind of issues. There are issues that probably, and I want to say that would. There are issues, there are people in my life that I am probably personally very close to because we hit it off as friends, but because on faith issues, we are not, and this is one of the things, and I recently had this conversation with someone that I do dearly love of, you and I do not agree on this faith issue, and so you are not my primary community that I do belong to. That is an essential for this kind of a connection. In our world, that is beyond conservative on a theological belief. That is maybe even bordering on hateful. Going back to our thing of, you're now saying there's something different between, and all I'm saying is there is a difference. I have drawn my allegiance. And that doesn't mean I don't love you. That doesn't mean I'm not working for your good. But there are things that you and I, this person, in fact, was asking me to be a part of something and to do something that I had to tell them, I can come to this line, but I can't go further. And they said, well, you would do that for someone at your church. And I said, yes, I would. Because we're not on the exact, and it's just different. And I get that that's, for many people, that is a big struggle. But it goes back to the conversation we were having, 3-4 weeks ago about love and having tough conversations and being honest about where we're at. And I think it's the same thing with these distinctions. The conservative progressive thing is not as important to me really as are we a part of the body of Christ together? And then I've got to let some of these other things not be as big of a deal to me.
Yeah, make the best decision you can. When we're dealing anything politically in our country, you have to accept that there are probably as many believers on the other side of whatever issue you're on that you would agree with. If you just talked about Christianity, you would agree with them on all of those issues. On things the Bible makes plain.
Yes.
like for instance, it never has made sense to me that people say evangelicals voted this way.
Mhm.
Well, that's only true if you ignore everybody who's not white.
That's right.
Evangelical is a spiritual term. It has to do with, do you believe the Bible? Do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Do you believe these historical claims? There is a definition of evangelical that has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah.
And that group has been divided for a long time politically.
Yes.
And it's a shame that it is in some ways, but it's because in our country, politics has a way of squeezing itself in above the spiritual.
It is its own thing.
Yeah, it would, and if we would all be honest and say, hey, there's some repentance that has to take place on both those sides of, I should not be able to look and say, hey, you're a white Christian, you probably voted for, because if these issues really aren't biblical enough for us to see them in the Bible crystal clear that we can go to, there ought to be a mixture, and there ought to be a pretty good mixture.
Yeah.
I can see where people can wind up on both sides, but it should not come down that cleanly.
Yeah. So I guess you could probably surmise from that discussion we just had that I don't think any of us three would agree with. There's been a pretty popular Christian leader come out in the past several months who has basically come out and said, if you vote this way, you're a Christian. If you vote this way, you can't be a Christian.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty much, he's made that very clear. Anyone who votes left of me, basically, he said.
So he was the dividing line.
Wherever you put that.
I'll just say then, my Christianity has been up and back. Then I have been all over the place. If Jesus is going to look at my ballots, we're all over the place.
That'll preach.
If that's what we're going to talk about is
on Judgment Day, is Jesus going to look at your ballot?
Yeah, because I have written in elders of our church for things before. They're not in a party that I know of.
So, did you guys have any other?
I don't.
Comments. So I just thought to wrap this up. I thought what I would say to the person, if you still feel frustrated about the answer to our question. First of all, I'm sorry because it was kind of vague. We tried to do our best, and we weren't really trying to avoid that. It just is very vague. If you want to know something specific in the conservative, progressive world, I would be more than happy. I think all of us would to have that conversation or to even answer the question. And we even have. I think if you go back and look at other episodes of this podcast, we have dealt with some very controversial issues that fall on either side of the progressive conservative lines that have been drawn in our political world these days. So we're more than happy to talk about them. I hope we served your question well, but I feel like we did the best we could with what we had.
I think so.
So like we said, this is the final podcast of 2022, and we are actually, just to let you know, we're going to take a break, so we will not have a podcast next week, which will be the first Tuesday in January, because of just some holiday issues. We won't have time to film one this season. Plus, as it stands right now, I got no more questions from you guys.
Send them in.
So the bucket of questions is empty, so we are full on waiting for your questions to come in. So you go ahead and jump on the form that's right there in the description of this podcast and fill that out and let us know what your questions are. And then when we come back in the second week of January, your question, if you get it in first, will be the first one we answer. So there you go. Have a great New Year's. If you make resolutions, hope you don't screw them up. You probably will.
Already have.
Can I just warn you, by the end of January, you probably will. So, take that for what it is. But we do hope things constantly get better. In that way, I am progressive.
Yes.
I hope 23 is better than 22. So call me progressive on that if you want. So,
I will.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Progressive.
That's me. See you next time.